Hey, this video is meant to help you with 6.2 Step 2. We're going to do some work on Easter Monday in Memoriam ET. This was the poem that was chosen in 2021. And in 2021 there was this poem, and there was an extract from a nonfiction piece that we'll get to in the next lesson. But at any rate, this one, this poem, I think worked pretty well for a lot of students. This year, in that particular year, we actually got some samples back. And so for the last step of 6.2, you can actually read a former Cooper student's essay and see how it scored by some unknown IB examiner somewhere in the world. But at any rate, let's take a look at this poem first before you go on to do the imagery activity. When the poem was put into the test, the IB examiners decided to introduce it with this text at the very top. Eleanor Farjean wrote this poem in memory of a close friend, E.T., Edward Thomas, who died in battle. So if you get information like that in your test, you can use it. They mean for you guys to use this information. It's not something you're supposed to ignore. So it's not part of the text itself, so you don't need to analyze it, but you can use it to help inform your analysis of the actual poem. So we know the poet is Eleanor Farjean, so the poem is something she wrote about a personal friend, and we know that this friend died in battle. So because of that, we know that the speaker of this poem is the poet. We can't ever assume that, but since we're told that in this sentence at the beginning, we can then say the speaker is the poet Farjean. They are one in the same. It's kind of like, Jesmond Ward writing about herself in her book. It's the same thing here. This is a biographical poem, even though it is a poem. All right, so the poem's title is Easter Monday in Memoriam E.T. Let me read it for you. A reminder that when we read poetry, we pause only at punctuation, not necessarily at the end of a line. So this first line we're not going to pause at, the second we're not going to pause at, the third we're not going to pause at. We finally pause here at line 4. Similarly, we do pause in the middle of a line if there is punctuation, and so we would be pausing at all of these spots here. It's important because it affects the understanding of the poem to read it sentence by sentence instead of line by line, but also because sometimes there's rhyming in there, and it comes out more clearly when you pause at the correct places. Here we go. In the last letter that I had from France, you thanked me for the silver Easter egg which I had hidden in the box of apples you liked to munch beyond all other fruit. You found the egg the Monday before Easter and said, I will praise Easter Monday now. It was such a lovely morning. Then you spoke of the coming battle and said, this is the eve. Goodbye, and may I have a letter soon. That Easter Monday was a day for praise. It was such a lovely morning. In our garden we sowed the earliest seeds, and in the orchard the apple bud was ripe. It was the eve. There are 3 letters that you will not get. And our guiding question is, how is imagery used to convey the poet's feelings? So I think the first thing that you want to do when you get your poem in May is to do a SCASI. And the first S in SCASI stands for setting or situation. The setting of this poem is it's the last letter from E.T. just before he dies in battle in France. And how do we know that? Well, we know he dies up here because of the explanation, but we also know because of line 14. There are 3 letters that you will not get, and we can infer from that Farjean wrote letters, but he won't receive them because he dies in this battle. Okay? E.F. Farjean is in her garden and orchard. She's with someone else, not with E.T. He is in France in a war. And he has sent her apples, a silver egg, and letters, 3 of which he will never receive. The characters, we have Eleanor Farjeon, who is the poet. We know that because of this line at the top. She writes to E.T., her close friend who dies, and quotes his last letter. So this is his letter she is quoting. She tells us that it's his last letter right here. And so in this letter, he thanks her and speaks of the battle, asks for more letters, and then, of course, he does die. We also know that Farjeon has a garden and an orchard with someone else, and she lives there. The action of the poem is that Farjeon hid a silver egg in a box of apples and sent it to Thomas, who was at battle. This seems like kind of a strange thing to send, but she sends actually a box of fruit to him in battle, and the fruit is apples, and in it she hides a silver egg. It's Easter time. And then he wrote back to her, and this is the last letter she gets from him to thank her and to continue correspondence. The goodbye in line 9 ends up being his final goodbye to her. And even though he asks for a letter soon and she sends them, he will not get these letters as he is no longer alive. Farjeon then enjoys an Easter Monday as a day for praise and calls it such a lovely morning, just as E.T. did. It's not clear if this is the same Monday that Thomas is writing about, but one thing we do know is that there are 3 letters you will not get. And the contrast, I think, is important here in these 3 lines because we see the seeds that she sows and the apple buds that are ripe. Those are things that are in anticipation for something to be reaped or harvested. The seeds would grow into plants that could be harvested. The buds would grow into apples that could be picked. And of course, that is the opposite of what is going to happen with her friend because his life was taken. He has died, and he will not receive these letters. She will not receive any kind of fruit from their correspondence, so to speak. All right, how about 6.2 step? So yeah, we're still on 6.2 step 2. Okay, now we're going to tackle the imagery activity, right? All right, so I highlighted some images here. We've got the last letter, the 3 letters. They're not great images. They're kind of just references, but I suppose we can visually picture them in our mind's eye. Silver Easter egg is, I think, a good example of a visual image, as well as the box of apples. You like to munch beyond all other fruit, I think, evokes the sense of taste a bit. In our garden, we sowed our earliest seeds, and in the orchard, the apple bud was ripe are both visual images, maybe with some olfactory and gustatory imagery thrown in there. Now, you can see if the guiding question is asking about imagery, and we only find at best, what have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 images. We're going to have to write about probably more than just these 8 images. Well, how do we do that? The guiding question is asking about imagery. Here's the answer. You can write about other aspects of language, other formal and technical aspects in the poem, as long as you write about them in connection to the imagery. All right? So if you're writing about the fact that she quotes the lines from his letter, or the repetition of praising Easter Monday and such a lovely morning, you can write about those as long as you're writing about them in connection with imagery used in the poem. Okay? Let's move on then. Your job is to take 3 of these and do the imagery activity. What I did for you was I did the imagery activity with the last poem as an example. So remember Late Love? Late Love was this one about the people in love and the lot that are not in love. Well, I did the imagery activity questions on this poem to show you what I'm looking for and give you a good example of how to do this. So the directions in your packet are to answer the questions using specific images from the text directly quoted. And the first thing that you're supposed to do is to give your immediate response. Make a quick graphic response, draw a list what you see or hear, list images, write questions, list phrases. This is really just a time for you to brainstorm and put your pencil on paper and just draw in there whatever you want. I would love to see your illustrative drawings of the imagery. You don't have to use any words or any language of any kind for number one. For number two, you need to pick 3 images from the poem and just list them. So I chose the first 3 from Late Love. These are all about the people in love, how they strut about, how tall they grow, and their hair glossy, their skin shining. So you can see I included the line numbers. Just simply the number inside parentheses is good enough, and I listed them there. The next step gets a little more complex. The next step is to answer each question, A, B, and C, for each image. So for the first image, how they strut about, my answer to the question, what does this image make you think of, is strutting makes me think of peacocks or disco dancers, chest out, legs high, stepping, feeling good about themselves. And what does the image make you see, hear, smell, taste, feel, touch, and emotion? Imagine, I said, strutting makes me feel the ground under my feet, and seeing others strutting about makes me see the puffed up chests proudly displayed. C is, what does it remind you of? And for me, it reminds me of peacocks I saw in a California garden about a year ago, and how they were so regal and adversarial, proud and ready to fight you. Then for the next image, how tall they grow, I've got, as far as what it makes me think of, when I'm thinking about an adult person growing tall, I think of the effects feeling good has on the body, standing straight, looking out and around, feeling proud to be who you are and to engage with the world. If I think about just this isolated image of how tall they grow, I think about plants growing and wide green stalks growing tall. And that reminds me of Jack and the Beanstalk, how tall and fast and strong that grew. So you can see how kind of random and all over the place your answers can be. It really is just a chance for you to interact with the text slowly and carefully, and allow yourself to feel the feelings that the poem evokes, that the imagery evokes. Let your thoughts go wherever these images take you. The last one, their hair glossy, their skin shining. I said glossy makes me think of leaves or lip gloss catching the light with the moisture. Skin shining makes me think of a close-up of a young face in the sunlight. For glossy, I can see it and feel it shining too, because like the radiation of sunlight is something I can feel tactily. C, it reminds me of an advertisement for hair and makeup, or a plant out in the sun after a rain. Okay, moving on to the next object. This one you're actually looking at how the images relate to each other. So you first look at images 1 and 2, and mine are how they strut about and how tall they grow. How are they related to each other? What links are there between them? What connections, similarities, differences, progressions, regressions do I see? Well, what I notice is the tall stature in both, because strutting requires a tall stature. And so the 2 images work well with the idea of people walking around proudly announcing themselves as visible, powerful people in love. Image 1 and 3, how they strut about and their hair glossy, their skin shining, I notice they almost seem causal, like one creates the next. Because of the glossy hair and shining skin, the people are strutting like models. Or maybe because they're strutting like models, they seem like they have glossy hair, or you notice the glossy hair and shining skin. They seem to relate very close to one another. Images 2 and 3 are, what is 2? How tall they grow. I got the wrong one here. And their hair glossy, their skin shining. Those both have organic connections. How tall they grow and their hair glossy and their skin shining. And they make me think of plants with each image. And I'm reminded how healthy and lush gardens in the summer can be. What do all images have in common? They all describe the lot in love as beautiful, healthy, and proud. The fact of being in love seems to allow for a physical manifestation of youthful, organic lushness. And I really wouldn't have gotten to this kind of deep understanding had I not spent the amount of time I spent with each image. And so that's the kind of thing that you're going to need to do, both for this activity and then for the poem when you get it at the exam in May. All right, how about 7? How do the images have an effect on the poem? Here's what I came up with. They create the idea that people in love are beautiful and healthy, and when contrasting the lot not in love, remind us of the extent of the contrasts. It also makes me think of the fact that sometimes we appear more beautiful when we're happier, and that, and then how this can become a cycle. It also connects to the idea of the lot in love only being temporarily in love, in the same way that beauty and organic youth is fleeting, it doesn't last, so too is the aspect of being in love. And this is mentioned in lines 4 and 5. So since this question is asking about the effect on the poem, I can connect other parts of the poem to it besides the imagery. And what I'm talking about for 4 and 5, let's just quick take a look at what I was talking about there. I'm talking about they don't remember who they have been, and just for this time. So this is about the temporal or fleeting or transient nature of love, not lasting. Okay? All right, so let's go back to the next. This is the last thing that we need to do. I think it's supposed to be an 8. Make an arguable assertion about the poem as a whole. How do the ideas above coalesce into a singular thought or feeling? Here's what I came up with. The physical and organic imagery of the lot in love creates a temporary picture of the epitome of beauty, health, and self-assuredness. All right, and so this is just a portion of the poem. I would still have to deal with the imagery about the lot not in love, and then those final interesting comparative images at the very end of the poem. Okay, this is just simply an example for you to use as you work on the Easter poem. Good luck to you, and please talk to me about your ideas, your thoughts, your questions. How much do you love or hate poetry? You know, I'm here.